Funding for Schaefer-Ellis is provided by
SeatGeek, the sponsor of today's video. Well, I've talked about Kung Fu Panda 1, 2, and technically 4 for a little bit. I gotta complete the set, right? Truth be told, I don't really have a ton to say about Kung Fu Panda 3. Like most people, I consider 1 and 2 to be the pinnacle of the series. And prior to this year, 3 was kinda just a decent conclusion to the trilogy, and a solid way of finishing the story arc they set up at the end of 2. I like it, but I would never really revisit it compared to the first 2. Well, now that I know what a bad Kung Fu Panda movie looks like, boy oh boy has my appreciation for the third film grown. What it lacks in compelling writing and surprising maturity, it makes up for with stellar art direction, a heart that is firmly in the right place, and a solid conclusive journey for Poe's character to undergo. Let's talk about what this movie does right. I don't think this video will be as long as the previous two. It'll probably lean closer to the length of my Over the Hedge video. Sometimes you don't have all that much to say about a 7 out of 10 movie, and that's okay. Time to get into what there is to say, including Poe's dad, Lee, is a pretty decent character. I mean, he's voiced by Walter. How could he not be? The joke of them meeting each other but not immediately realizing they're father and son takes me out every time. And on this rewatch, I really came to appreciate the scene where they wreck all the shit in the Jade Palace together. Originally, I kinda thought it was goofy filler in a movie not exactly hurting in terms of goofy filler scenes. But it's honestly a great sequence for them to bond together. They feel like two kids in a candy store and their connection is super sweet. See, this is a pretty good excuse to rehash the scene from the first movie where Poe encounters all these relics. And then 4 just rehash the rehash. 5 will do the same thing, just watch. Okay, the last thing I want to do is compare this movie too much to 4. I want to give it its flowers on its own merits, and also I like pretending the series ended after 3, don't you? One aspect of Lee a lot of people take issue with is the liar reveal plotline, where he convinces Poe to return to the Panda village so he can learn Chi. And then it turns out he doesn't know Chi. Yeah, it's an immoral thing to do. He definitely doesn't grasp the stakes of the situation, or understand how capable of a warrior Poe is. But how could he? I'd argue that his actions here, while not great, do make complete sense for his character. He clearly isn't motivated to lie to Poe out of selfishness. He just feels an obligation to protect Poe any way he can, which is spurred on by the fact that he lost him for years. It adds up, and they also don't waste that much time on them being apart. It takes like 5 minutes for them to reconcile. I know that sounds a little rushed on paper, but it really works because A, we know they're inevitably gonna get back together, so why draw it out? And B, Lee is motivated to apologize and reconnect with Poe because of Mr. Ping! Oh baby, the best character in the Kung Fu Panda cinematic universe. You guys know that I'm the biggest Mr. Ping stan on the planet. And I honestly think out of all the movies, this is his best and most heartfelt appearance. For a movie about Poe reconnecting with his birth dad, I'm so glad they realized that Ping should play a major role in the film's emotional arc. He starts out incredibly troubled by Lee suddenly appearing and potentially taking his son away. He acts rude and dismissive of Lee over the course of the film, but much like Lee's lie, you completely understand where he's coming from. Seeing him grapple with his insecurity, but also get won over by Lee and the Panda village is great, and he redeems his rude behavior by concluding his arc and consoling Lee at his lowest point, insisting that Lee did the right thing for the wrong reasons, and that the two of them should be there for Poe now, because he needs both his dads. That little scene of him putting the picture of the three of them next to the picture of Poe and his mom, man, that just says it all. I think this is my favorite scene in the movie. It's just nice to see these two finally connect, and also, Mr. Ping is epic. Generally, I think the dad stuff is great in this film. Before we continue on with the Pandaning, I want to ask, do you guys like going to see shows, like concerts or musicals? You know, I'm a big fan of one of those things, and basically everyone else on the planet is a big fan of the other. The good news is, there's a super helpful way for you to get out of the house and experience live music or live theater. With today's sponsor, SeatGeek. It's an incredibly great and helpful way for you to find tickets for shows you want to see. Right now, artists like Billie Eilish, Sabrina Carpenter, and Post Malone are touring. Not to mention, there's always some amazing musicals like Hadestown or Moulin Rouge for you to check out. I don't know about you, but SeatGeek makes it significantly more exciting for me to buy tickets to see Hadestown for a third time, which I may or may not be doing as I record this. Shh. Each ticket is rated on a scale from 1 to 10, so look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. And the best part is, you can use my code REALIST10 to get 10% off any tickets on SeatGeek, whether you're a new customer or not. Sports, concerts, festivals, musicals, you name it. It doesn't matter. 10% off of anything. That's an incredible deal, and it'll kick in no matter how many times you bought tickets using SeatGeek before. So take out your phone, open the SeatGeek app, and add code REALIST10 to your account. Seriously, do it now because this offer is only available for a limited time. Enjoy the show with SeatGeek. For being an inarguable downgrade from the shocking emotional depth of Tai Lung and Shen, it's still hard to argue that Kai doesn't function really well as a villain. Yeah, he tragically has no compelling motivation to speak of. He just kinda wanted power, and they don't really delve into any pain he felt from being quote-unquote betrayed by Oogway. Like, with Tai Lung, he was inarguably betrayed by Shifu, and they let you know that with some great emotional scenes. But Kai just feels like a bitter rage monster more than anything. I kept waiting for some sort of twist with Kai to be revealed in the final act. Just something that would make his character more interesting than warmonger who just wanted power. Seriously, that's it. He just decided he wanted to use chi for evil one day. I mean, it's better than turning evil because people say you're too small to learn Kung Fu, just as a random non-specific example. But it's one of the biggest steps down the writing took between this installment and the previous two. With that said, they make up for it by making him damn intimidating. That sick-ass musical score that accompanies him as he rhythmically slams his blades on the ground. You can't deny that he's got style. And you feel the threat of him as he slowly whittles down the cast and turns every Kung Fu master into his personal zombie army. Despite being less interesting than the other villains, he feels like the most powerful threat Po has ever faced. One who is genuinely unstoppable by normal means. I mean, they pretty effectively showcase that when the Wuxi finger hold, the move Po defeated Tai Lung with, does absolutely nothing to this guy. And he even mocks Po for it, which, yeah, I think he's a pretty funny character too. This is only like the 10th or 11th most memorable J.K. Simmons vocal performance, but even so, he really gives it his all with some great comedic and intense dramatic delivery. I do wish they went a little further with him in some aspects, like the backstory and motivation, obviously, but I also feel like he should have just completely annihilated the Jade Palace. Shifu literally says, "You may have destroyed the Jade Palace," but like, he only took out a couple pillars, I don't know. I would have felt a lot more weight if he just tore the entire gigantic building down in a fit of rage, rather than just tearing down the Oogway statue that wasn't there in the previous movies. It really would have given off an, oh shit, this guy means business aura. But he's still pretty good, even without that. The battles with him in the spirit world look incredible and super striking. In fact, that's another thing that's great about this movie. It continues where 2 left off and gives us some masterfully animated and edited sequences. The colors and use of shading during Po's opening scene and his training montage with the village look sick as hell. It's the sort of stylization that you didn't really get a lot from pre-Spider-Verse mainstream animated movies. Nah, but this movie always looks great, even in normal, non-stylized scenes. The backgrounds and skylines really are a sight to behold. There's this simple traveling montage Po and Lee go on with some awesome environments that I wish we could have seen more than 2 seconds of in the film. You can't argue they weren't still cooking with the art direction and overall direction of this film. It's gorgeous. Alright, I think it's time to move on to the last thing I have to say about it. Yeah, I told you this would be short. Let's talk about our main man himself, Po. Late in this film, Oogway says that he saw the future and the past of Kung Fu in Po. I think that's a pretty relevant line when discussing his journey between the second and third films. The second one was about him reconciling with his past and accepting and healing from his trauma in order to forge a future for himself. This movie also balances the yin and yang of past and future, but in a different way. Po was focused on his past in the second film and learned to look towards the future by the end. But in this one, he starts out concerned with the future Shifu presents to him as a teacher of the Jade Palace. It's a rather absurd situation, right? The idea that Po should be in charge of instructing the Furious Five, and as expected, it doesn't go very well. But, in a rather clever manner, he eventually does manage to carve out a future for himself as a teacher, and it's by utilizing his past. both the panda village that he originated from, and the manner in which he was trained in the first place. In the first film, he couldn't be trained in the same way Shifu trained the five, so instead, Shifu played to his traits, utilizing his love of eating as a motivator. Additionally, Po uses his body weight and general goofy antics to get a leg up on Tai Lung. What made him special and unique is what allowed him to do great kung fu. And he adopts a similar mindset with the pandas of his village, utilizing every little goofy skill they have and building off of that to make them fighters in a sense. It's honestly pretty brilliant the way they utilize Po's journey throughout the first movie, and allow that to inform the way his character moves forward in this one. And I think this nice bookend to Po's story is exactly why this movie as a whole serves as such a great bookend to the Kung Fu Panda series. It just feels conclusive in a lot of ways. Like, not to the point where you couldn't tell more stories in this universe, but to the point where it just feels right to end here. Po has officially reconciled every aspect of his past and future. He not only got over his emotional scars in the previous film, but in this one, he officially got a chance to reconnect with his panda roots and reconcile that with his new identity as a kung fu master, living up to the legacy of the Dragon Warrior by commanding a giant spirit dragon, which is sick as hell. Oogway even reveals that he chose Po because he knew Po would go on to become a master of Chi like the pandas before him. I've heard some opinions that this is a bit of a retcon of the whole point of the first film, since Oogway secretly knew Po was predestined for greatness just by being a panda. But I don't actually mind this. I think it fits in pretty well and doesn't undermine the fact that Po felt like an impossible student to train into a kung fu master in the first film, due to his goofiness and seeming lack of ability. His species had nothing to do with him as a person, and everything he achieved over the course of the trilogy were his own accomplishments. Sure, the power of the panda's chi was what ultimately defeated Kai, but they never would have been inspired to live up to their true potential without Po's instruction and encouragement. Despite its goofier tone and how much more frequently it leads into slightly repetitive gags with all the new pandas they introduce, I think this movie makes all the sense in the world as the conclusion of Po's journey. It's heartfelt, it's fun, it's cool as hell to look at. It's very much a worthy entry in the franchise, even if I don't quite adore it as much as the first two. Yeah, I mean, I think that's all I have to say about it. It's good, and I respect it a ton more nowadays. It's nice to get something that feels like a movie, like it's a story worth being told on the big screen with a big budget, and not just something that clearly should have been in one of the TV shows. I've really tried my best to not compare this to 4 too much, but yeah, it's a little bit hard not to. For some people, 3 was the beginning of the slippery slope that led into the sheer meaninglessness that every single aspect of 4 is drenched in. But I think right underneath the more mundane pacing and somewhat weak characterization of the new characters, there is a lot of meaning to appreciate in 3. It doesn't all coalesce into a masterpiece, but it's a good movie that, yeah, on some levels is a disappointment compared to the first 2. But I think saying that is a disservice to what it does right. It finishes Po's story in a nice way, it's a pretty fun movie in its own right, and I think more than anything else, it slots in nicely with the previous 2 movies because it has respect for them. It builds off both their stories in good ways, treats Shen's heinous actions with the terror they deserve, brings back a character as important as Oogway in a meaningful way that doesn't devalue his passing in the first movie, and doesn't do anything that even comes close to the same level of utter nonsense as making Shen bow to Po, or bringing back a previous villain who exploded. I know this isn't about 4, I'm sorry, it's just so hard to not complain about it. But I don't think it's worth making a whole big analysis about. A lot of other people have already done that, and I think I said my piece in my initial review. The good news is, we'll always have the trilogy to look back on. It concludes all of its threads in satisfying ways, and 4 genuinely does not matter and is easily ignorable. So yeah, that's all of the Kung Fu Panda movies talked about. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not totally sure how much more I want to do analysis videos on DreamWorks movies anymore. I mean, for one thing, a lot of you can probably tell that I'm a little burnt out from talking about animated movies in general, and I would much rather rank director filmographies, make gaming and musical theater videos, and rank the Star Wars movies in increasingly dumb and nonsensical ways. But the other thing with DreamWorks specifically is that I don't have it in me to deal with their copyright nonsense. Disney is easy, they leave my videos alone, even though I stole their big funny crab to uses my persona. But no matter what I do to DreamWorks footage, Universal is always gonna swoop in and copyright it. Meaning, I just don't know if I'm interested in fighting this losing battle with them any longer. If I get really inspired by a DreamWorks movie, either old or new in the future, maybe we'll return to this style of video. But for now, much like Kung Fu Panda 3 itself, this seems like a good place to leave off. Well, see ya. Good night, Valley of Peace.